Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Thanks for joining me on another solo cast. We're just going to be taking a deep dive into agency-led recruiting. Right? So this conversation is all about recruiting. However, it is not necessarily from the candidate's perspective. It's going to have a lot to do with the candidate's perspective because it takes two to tango. Right? We can't just worry about ourselves and what we want to say, what we want to do. We have to worry about how that's received, how those that are listening are going to receive it, how they're going to take part or not take part. And I guess you could mic drop that, make it into a whole leadership segment all on its own. But so for those that follow along, you'll know that I came from a recruiting assignment recently. At the same time, you might also say, well, since you're out of recruiting, why are you still talking about recruiting? Well, as I've said in a prior post, recruiting is truly everyone's job in the job. So as long as we have a recruiting issue, as long as we have a retention issue, it is incumbent on those within the culture, within the profession to take a vested interest, to take vested engagement and own this problem, right? Own this issue and bring to it solutions, pieces of solutions, ideas, anecdotes, so that we can share and get better. I mean, that's kind of the whole purpose of this whole project. A lot of it's spurned from social media. You know, we've been on the podcast for about a year and a half. And so it's all about continuing forward and upward, right? So we talk about recruiting. Why this is front of mind is because not many days go by before I see another headline involving police recruiting. And I do want to take a moment to say there's a lot of agencies that are doing a great job, right? They're leaning into principles that me and my right-hand man and, shout out Brian, you've heard him on prior episodes, but also not just us, right? Not just the recruiting unit, not just the hiring unit with the backgrounders and the onboarding dude, but the whole department, right? We're not there at every moment, in every corridor, in every squad car, talking about the agency, interacting in the substations. This is the purview that we wanted candidates to see. This is the angle that we wanted prospective officers and recruits to feel. And that's where we really leaned into that arms wide open, doors wide open approach, right? Come on in, check us out. What you see is what you get. And also, we're going to help you get there. Right? We see a lot of agencies throughout the nation that are taking the same types of approaches, leaning into the same themes, things that I've written about for Police One, things that I've spoken about in webinars, things that a lot of y'all that follow along know, which is to put your best foot forward and be positive, engaged, be a mentor, right? Bring people into the agency culture, what energy you want them to take on and exude, and so on, right? Just mentorship 101. While we do see a lot of agencies that are doing well, we also see a lot of agencies that are not doing well. A not so long ago episode, I talked about essentially the lowering of physical standards as the forefront of the episode in a solo cast. And this is exactly recruiting going wrong, right? This is us looking at the problem and just doing like the easiest non-invested approach, which is like, let's open the doors wider, right? Let's take standards down. It doesn't take a genius to recognize that this is going to create new issues and probably arguably not even fix the first issue in the first place, right? So without further ado, I just kind of wanted to, teach a person to fish, which is a lot of what the social media project and the podcast is about. It's free, tangible information, things that you can take with you, things that you can take to your agency, things that you can use to spur a conversation I don't claim to have any amazing ideas, but what ideas I have, I'm happy to share them and hope that you take those and run with them and make them into your amazing idea. Make them into the game changer, record breaker that I'm going to be reading about later and I can bring back to my agency, right? It's a team, it's a community, and that's what this is all about. So when I talk about essentially easy to find, easy to recognize tips, I looked no further at this point in time to the Google machine, and I typed into the search engine of your choice, really. But top recruiting tips, right? Let's just look at what's common practice out there. Let's look at what the private sector is doing. Let's not try to reinvent the wheel, okay? So there are a lot of lists. You can find tons of them, right? Indeed.com, LinkedIn, different hiring platforms, different vendors that are recruit based, right? Recruiter based, where you can hire them for tens, twenties, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not exaggerating, hundreds of thousands of dollars to tell you how to recruit, how to fill your ranks in your agency, right? Everyone in the last few years with this public safety issue, this lack of support and increased record high scrutiny of police. No one wants to be a cop. All these people come out of the woodwork wanting to share, right? Wanting to help you. And I felt that. I heard that, right? I heard those pitches. It's a media outlet here. And it's like, hey, we just want to share your story. And I thought it was going to be like, cool, like interview us. You get a nice little piece. It's a win-win. You get to talk about the local agency, and you also get to share some awareness how to get a hold of us, what we're looking for. But it was a marketing scheme. It was scheme's it's kind of got a twinge to it, right? A flavor to it, but it was a sell, right? Not disparaging them. They got a business, they got a product to sell, a local agency in our county. Rather than entertain, I talked to their team for free, coming off the heels of our success, because it is all about uplifting each other. But I was like, honestly, like, I can't do this as part of my day to day. I have a job to do, but I'm happy to help you, right? Just let me know. Let me know how I can help. And they'd actually hired an ad agency like $200,000, and this is over a year ago, and I've not heard from officers over there of the great success of their marketing campaigns, right? Because you don't need a marketer to tell you how to fill your ranks, right? You know what you need. You just need a little bit of insight and advice as to how to get that done. And that's where this is coming in. That's where this episode's coming in. That's where my content comes in. And that's where this free resource comes in, right? The episode's free, and also what I'm going to be talking about is free. So we'll just jump into it. Like I said, you can find a lot of lists. I looked at a couple, just browsed them, and where I landed was, one of the top 5 that popped up when I searched it, and it's from bonusly.com. So bonus, like, yay, win, prize, ly.com. And it's called Simple Recruiting Tips You'll Be Happy You Learned. Sounds good, right? So we'll jump into it. This has 15 tips. I won't spend too much time on each one because that could obviously expand out to a long episode, but I just want to get you thinking of how you can adopt this on, right? If you're a full-time recruiter or you're a part-time recruiter and this is one of your many, many hats that you just got added onto, right? There are things that you and your team and your agency can do that aren't that complicated, right? So we'll jump into it. Number 1, encourage employee referrals. Okay, so there's a lot of departments that offer like a literal cash bonus, like, hey, you bring me your buddy, we hire him or her, here's $1,000, or here's whatever. And let's think broadly, because budgets can range, bandwidth and resources can range. Like, let's just think about how this could be incentivized, right? Think outside the box. Maybe it's some comp time. Maybe it's recognizing that, hey, if you do go above and beyond, you are essentially valuing that bring into the culture. A lot of people that are engaged, they want to grow in their career, they want to grow in opportunities. Why not incentivize that with recognition, right? We should be recognizing those that are helping recruit. This is one of the hardest jobs that law enforcement has faced in the last couple of years. And your recruiter, whether they're a full-time or part-time, if you have a lot of vacancies, your recruiter should be one of the hardest working people in the building. You know, you might tie it up with like an active SWAT team leader, or a homicide detective if you have a violent area. But if you have a deficit, if you truly have a deficit, the recruiter or the recruiting team needs to be the hardest working people in the building. Period. If you have someone that isn't, and you have a large gap of vacancies, then you got to find somebody else, right? It's time to make some decisions. This is the lifeblood of your organization. This is the lifeblood of your culture. You cannot sleep on it. There are a lot of assignments that historically have been a chill spot to be in. Recruiting in this day and age is not one of them. School resource officer in this day and age is not one of them. So back to the list. We know how to do referrals. Think outside the box. Number 2, prioritize candidate experience. I've told stories many times how I tested in the Tri-County area, truly king in Snohomish County. But once I figured out the formula, once I figured out my own confidence and how to test well, how to interview well, then I started getting through the process. Then I started getting through, background and polygraph. That was all easy for me. I was a pretty, clean-cut kid. But interviews were a struggle for a little bit. But then I started getting offers, right? Conditional offers. And by then, you'd been in and out of the building several times. It wasn't the type of climate that we have today where people need to bend over backwards, but it was a point where agencies had to try. They had to showcase what they had. I mean, they were still learning, but I was invited to do a ride along at my current agency, Kent PD, and that went extremely well. I met so many people, very, very curated professional folks, but also really down to earth. Like, clearly, they weren't putting on anything for me. I mean, they made it pretty clear. Some really did not have any impression, like they were trying to impress me, but they were real with me, and they were frank. They weren't rude or anything, but they weren't pulling punches either, right? They were asking me very specific questions. They were trying to get to know me just like I was trying to get to know them. But then they're also offering insights and things in which I could learn about them in the agency, right? So I felt like they really cared, and I felt like they cared to get to know me, and I wasn't just a body, just a number. Whereas, one county to the north, I had a situation where after I passed the chief's interview, I had the acting chief essentially asked me if I wanted the job, and I said courteously, with all due respect, assistant chief, I told a couple agencies I'd give them the week to respond. They're really close on my background. I also have conditional offers with them, and I'm asking respectfully if I could have a little bit of time to think about it, maybe a night, maybe a day. And she sighed, she rolled her eyes, she looked at the board next to her, she said, well, I got 5 spots in this Northern Regional Academy, and I guess, just let me know if you want one of them, but I got to fill them. And man, that said so much to me, right? That said, I was literally a body, I was literally a number. I'd never been asked if there were any questions or anything I needed to learn about the agency. In fact, prior to that, the several times I'd been there for the polygraph, the background, the initial oral board, just about everyone was looking down, not engaging with me, not engaging with each other. I mean, these are officers and detectives and civilians that were, it was like someone messed with everyone's morning every time I was there, is what it felt like. And that said a lot to me too, right? And I later found out that there was a pretty toxic culture there. I heard from people that left the agency, came to our agency. That was a really real thing. And my intuition served me correctly, even at the ripe 21 years old I was. So pay attention to how you're engaging with people. They are going to pick up on that. Be genuine, but if you have a crap culture, then start working on fixing the crap culture. I mean, it's literally one day at a time. It's one engagement at a time. It's maybe you and your peers, you circle up, you figure out what's positive, and you start trying to expound that out, because you do have to be part of the change. Someone does. Someone has to start it, and others will follow. Don't want to turn that into a completely different podcast episode, but you get what I'm saying. All right, number 3, have a great offboarding process. So you wonder about offboarding. Why would that matter, right? Well, it's because people talk, and that's who you are as an agency. Who you are as an agency is not just how you treat people coming in when you have something to gain, but it's how you treat people when they're leaving. They're choosing not to be a part of your organization anymore. Do you give them due regard, due respect, communicate well? And I've heard good things. I've heard good things from the people that did make probation. I generally, especially now, coming out of recruiting and having a more direct link to some people that have either decided not to stay or it wasn't a good fit for them and they didn't make probation, where I reach out. I try to see them in person, but if I can't, I'll text them, say, hey, like, I'm here. Let me know if you have problems, questions, concerns, feedback. Also, let me know if you need a reference, because you got a good attitude and I could attest to that. And this is a hard agency to work for, but every agency is different. Every community structure and needs and pace are different. And if this is what you want, I don't have any reason to believe that you can't do it. Let me know if I can be a reference. That is valuing the person, right? Valuing the person and treating a person a certain way should be consistent from pre-hire to in-hire as an employee and then after. And it's really, really comforting to look back. If you have an agency that can look back at the majority of people that have left employment and said, yeah, it's not like they went to the next department over, or just a few square miles over that way or the other. They just chose a very similar agency, similar pay and all the things. So it's just us. Luckily, we don't have instances of that, right? We had a lot of people leave, as every agency did, across the state, out of the profession. We had people whose life situations changed. They left police work, or just the landscape of police work the last few years, and they said, hey, yeah, thank you, not for me anymore. I get it, right? Nothing personal. I've said it from the beginning, and I'll always keep saying it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. But you have a lot of questions to ask yourself as an agency, as agency leaders, if people are going to work at the department next door. Unfortunately, we haven't had that. All right, number 4, use modern tools. Okay, what does this mean? This means technology. This means social media. I know a lot of agencies that have had so much pushback with trying to mobilize and use more social media. Maybe it's from other city entities. Maybe it's their own reluctance to embrace this very relevant tool. I've had agency reps reach out, find out what we were doing for recruiting, and I would try to explain like how to use social media, like how to make it your own, how to establish brand, how to get an officer in control of that so you could control the message within reason, but have that direct contact with recruits, right? It's still something that people reach out to me directly on Blue Grit. People reach out to Brian all the time on Our Future Cops. It's a thing, right? They don't need to be talking to like a volunteer or a civilian that runs communications for the city. Like, that's not the same as talking to a recruiter through this format, social media messaging based thing, rather than going to a recruiting office like we did in yesteryear. But I have had agency reps say, oh yeah, we have social media, and then they write off everything I'm trying to tell them, right? And then they just go on to the next question, probably on their list of things to read, which is, if it's not working, ask yourself why it's not working. Don't just say, yeah, I'm doing those things that Tung said, right? Don't just say that. Don't just say, hey, I read the article you sent and we do all those things. Well, clearly you don't, because you have 20% vacant and my agency doesn't, by virtue, not because I'm special, but because my team all aligned from the top down, from the bottom up, to fill this critical need, right? Everyone leaned in, buckled down, and recognized like this is going to be uncomfortable for a while, but we all got to do work, right? Ask yourself what you're missing, right? It might be this episode, it might be the bullet points, but it's not just having the checkbox. We all know what checkboxes look like. They're not substantive, right? So is your social media actually helpful? Helpful. Is your technology actually helpful? There are so many vendors for all these little things. If you have the money and the budget and there's a product that sounds awesome, cool. Like I'm all for it, right? I'm for these kinds of databases where you can have all these candidates at one stage of the testing process get blasted with all this reminder information or how to reach out, these links, this text-based stuff. It just costs a lot of money. And when I was the recruiting manager as the sergeant, I was like, let's just try not to spend all that money and let's just do it down and dirty, right? Let's set up an Instagram, let's give out our work cell, and let's just text people, right? And let's just be relentless about follow up. And that's what me and Brian did. And it was successful, right? Is it easier or more efficient to use software? Absolutely, I'm sure it is, right? I was ready to go down that path and ask up the chain if we could have some technology to help us along, if we couldn't hack it, right? If the Excel spreadsheet wasn't going to work, but it did for our purposes until it doesn't, right? Things work until they don't. So make sure you're using tools. Number 5, practice collaborative hiring. Okay, so I already talked about this. It's not just about the recruiter, it's about the whole team, right? The chief or the sheriff has a message that is going to set the tone for your culture, that's going to set the tone for your brand. You can't go rogue and say all these things that aren't true as the recruiter, either for your agency or the scope of work. But recognize, be aligned, build the team, get on the same page. It truly took everyone from the chief to my commander, to me, to my recruiter, to my background officers. I mean, they're the ones really sussing out all these people, the ins and outs, trying to find integrity issues. Also, at the same time, trying to find that, revealing all these amazing things about these amazing people that are coming in to do this amazing work. And then we're getting more fired up about the ones we're getting fired up about. Like, it's all part of the team, right? The officers that we pair up for ride-alongs, like they're getting way more fired up after the ride-along when they meet one of value. At the same time, sometimes they have negative feedback, and we got to recognize that. We got to take that back to the bosses. We have to have an aligned mission to figure out who is the best fit for the agency and aka the public, right? So collaborate, one team. Number 6, write better job descriptions. And this is tricky because it often involves what a lot of this process involves, which is civil service, but look at what you can control, right? Maybe you do have a direct lead into HR and making job descriptions that are more relevant, less technical. I mean, yes, technical stuff is important, but if it's something where a current officer is reading the description, like I can't even follow what this is saying, then that's not helpful. But I'll also say, make this about your website, right? Make this about your pamphlets, your brochures, your social media. Again, right? No one wants to hear the same cookie cutter thing. And you could expand this into verbal delivery too, because early on in our quest, we ran into a lot of recruiters that said, hey, police work is awesome. Yes, 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 this, that. It's everything you want it to be and more, but it's not. So this job, this profession can be fantastic, but the job in Seattle is extremely different than the job in Kirkland, is extremely different than the job is in Thurston County, is extremely different than the job is in Kent, and so on. Port of Seattle, the airport, right? We could even start talking about WSP, Washington State Patrol, and you could translate these examples to every agency across the country, right? We could talk about tribal, we could talk about railroad cops, right? Yes, there are some carryovers to what law enforcement is, but what favors do you do yourselves or the recruiters by making it carte blanche, right? If you have a slow-paced town where you can really focus on relationships, say that, right? You don't need to be trying to appeal to some hard charger that's just going to be dissatisfied in a few years and leave anyway, right? Just be more into what you are into Be more about what you're about. Make that your branding. Okay? So, and we're going to get more into that. So, don't want to jump the gun there. Number 7, value quality over quantity. Man, this goes right back into hiring for numbers, lowering standards, all the things that, I'm pretty opinionated about, especially having been in and out of the seat. But we're not doing any favors by hiring crappy cops. Obviously, you could argue that crappy cops is why we're even having these conversations in the first place. If it wasn't for crappy cops, would we even be having this conversation? Would we just be all just well staffed up, and would it still be a widely respected, widely well received, credible profession? Would we have these social media, traditional media, public relations battles? I don't think so, right? If we value quality, we can expect quality. We expect quality that will manifest into the type of person, the type of officer someone will be, that will manifest into job performance. If we lower standards, we lower quality, we can only expect to have a lower caliber officer, which again, when it comes to judgment, training, professionalism, lack thereof of all of those, then we're just rolling the dice and we're continuing to roll. I don't know how to make that allegory. Like, we're rolling more and more dice in a more unfavorable situation, right? We're getting more likely to roll a bad turn. We're getting dicier. Like that pun. You get what I'm saying. Do not sacrifice quality. Make other things work, right? Problem solve in other directions. Incentivize the job, raise the caliber that way. Leverage work relationships, partner with in the PD, outside of the PD, other city entities, right? Make it work. You need to value officers to get valuable candidates. And that is financially, sure, but it's also support in other means. It's not strange that in agencies where the public officials are more publicly supportive of law enforcement, they're not having quite as hard of a time to hire. Like, that's a thing, right? This is highly scrutinized job. Does anyone want to get just blasted in the media, like outwardly, just for doing their job? No, and the public officials have a hand in that, right? Even within what a lot of people around the country say, like, is the one of the most liberal counties in the state and one of the most liberal states, it makes a huge difference. You can talk to local cops, not just my agency. Like, it makes a huge difference where you work and what your day-to-day is like. What your mental status is like, how you're emotionally regulating all this stress. That's a factor based on all these inputs and how you're supported or not supported, right? Whether you feel psychological, organizational safety, or whether you're dealing with organizational betrayal, and that's leading to moral injury. And we could go down another rabbit hole there. So pivot away from that rabbit hole, stick to the script. Going back to the list. Communicate a strong employee value proposition. So this one, I did have to look at it just to be accurate. The EVP, employee value proposition, has to do with what the organization would most like to be associated with as an employer, right? So we're getting into as the article states, give and get of the employment deal, right? What do you give? What do you get? And you could equate this just to salary and benefits, right? But I also talked about the other benefits, right? I'm not just talking about like the benefit package from HR, but I'm talking about how you feel valued. And yes, there's the pay stub, there's the 401k or 457b or whatever your government equivalent is. There are insurance coverage things, right? There's medical for your family. And if you don't have kids, you should talk to the officers of the agency who do, and they will tell you what's great or what's not so great, hopefully, about their package. But that can make a big difference, right? That could easily be tens of thousands of dollars a year in what you're getting in compensation or not, right? With cops, commonly it's take-home cars, training, and equipment. Like, do you have to buy your own stuff? And luckily, we're in a region where, most agencies can buy their officers patrol rifles and like good quality rifles, right? Like optics and all these things. But some places in the country, let's be real, like they're barely provided anything. Maybe a uniform, like one uniform, like what they have to pay out of pocket. I'd be really sad to hear, truly. Boots, all that gear, med supplies, right? That's a real thing where maybe you have a tourniquet and some chest seals, but do you have extras? Like, so if you use that for a civilian or a suspect, like, do you have one for you? I mean, these are real things, right? So talk to other agencies, see what they're doing, and see how you can pick that up. And that's also from like a union perspective, right? To make a quality workplace, right? Somewhere where people are supported, they have what they need to do the job they need to, right? And it's a collaboration, right? It's not like an us and them thing. It's, leadership within the department, within the union, within the city. Like, it should all be very collaborative, right? You're going to get a lot more. We know what it looks like with adversarial relationships in other places where they meet to talk about a contract and they just stare at each other until the meeting's done because they've already tried and they're just waiting to go to arbitration. And I'm sure it's every county in the country, because certainly here, but there's agencies where you're not you're not aligned for years. You're working out a contract, right? So figure out how you can get to that alignment. I know, easier said than done, but from a recruiting perspective, that's going to be key. That's going to make a big difference. Number 9, think like a marketer. I already talked about this, right? Branding. So branding from the upper echelon, that could be the governor, the mayor, the city council, certainly the department head, right? The chief, the sheriff, the command staff. What are folks saying publicly? What is making your department or your city stand out as why someone should regard it, right? And this is where you can get creative. Recognize all the reasons why someone might want to be a cop, and they might not be the same reasons why you or your recruiter or your chief wanted to be a cop, but you got to speak to those people out there, and you got to put the right people in visible spots, right? Whether that's the recruiter, like I said, it's got to be a grinder. He or she's got to be a grinder. And then you also have to have agency representatives. And some are already defaulting a certain way, right? Your background folks, whoever's doing your polygraph, if they're in your agency, like these are all representatives, right? But you can also choose, or you should be able to choose, who you're pairing candidates with. You should choose who's on the boards. Like, if you have interview boards, are these people truly representative of your department and what you're trying to hire for? Because if you just have the people that are in non-essential duties and they're just thrown on a board and they're super bored, pun intended, are they even engaged? Do they even care? Or were they just the easy person to grab out of this unit or what have you? And they've been doing it for X number of years. Like, if they don't really care, they're not going to show up like they care. And the candidates will feel that. Ask better questions. I want to make this into oral boards, right? Because we all have scenario-based questions historically, and I've said numerous times on the record that I think scenario-based questions are kind of dumb. You're really the only people that are going to shine are the people that have taken it before and have or heard about it before, right, from someone else that is a cop or has heard these questions. But it doesn't truly employ critical thinking. It doesn't truly reveal character. What someone would do in a hypothetical situation when they're a patrol cop and this is the call, or they pull over their grandma, like all these kinds of things. Like, there's better ways to find out who someone is or what they're about. So I'll leave that to you who's listening and those in charge, but ask better questions. That can be interpreted so many ways. But really, you got to look at your questions and make sure that each question actually has a purpose. And if your reason is because that's how we've always done it, then be ready to throw that out the window, right? There should be some reason, and maybe you got to ask around as to find out what the reason is, what you're trying to yield, what the goal of that question is. What's the intended result? What does an ideal scenario look like? Okay, number 11 is explore remote work arrangements. And that may not apply to policing, but where it will go is how your agency, how your culture, how your city takes care of people that are not able to fulfill the traditional job roles, right? Are they injured? Do they have the fast track to basically a workers' comp and you're trying to remove them off the books as soon as possible? Or are you going to accommodate people that want to work? Are you putting them on light duty? This makes a difference, and officers will know, right? Like the last thing we want to do is oftentimes get hurt and then be basically put out to pasture. Like no one wants that. People want to be useful. They want to be part of the team. And it means a lot when you have an agency that if you get hurt and you're able and you're willing to find work, right? Help the detectives, like learn how to grow your own development that way. Or, hey, you like being with your crew, you don't have that ambition, will help with phone reports, like do online reports, right? You're taking the work away from someone, and that can oftentimes be your own crew. Like that's something awesome that we can do, and it's really easy. Seek and embrace diversity. A lot of people hear diversity and they're going to think different things. A lot of people are going to think about like mandatory diversity training put on through their government agency or what have you. But like, let's just think about it, right? We're serving a diverse population. And for some, that might mean more things than others, with ethnic diversity, like actual racial or ethnic breakdown, right? Immigrant populations, etc. But we do truly serve a diverse population in that we serve everybody. Everybody that is in, lives in, coming through your town or your jurisdiction, your airport, your railway, it's all people, right? Of all levels of economic background, all backgrounds of like how did they grow up. And I'm not even talking about like financial economic background. I'm just talking about, did some people have discord in their family? Like how many people out there that you interact with, how many people out there that you interact with had a lot of turmoil in their households? How many people grew up playing sports? Right? These are all these random things. How many people grew up in the foster care system? How many people grew up in foster care? Right? These are all very different life situations. So we have to recognize that if we do a good job trying to engage candidates with diverse backgrounds, and that is everything I'm talking about, right? Whether you went to graduate school or college or not, whether you went to the military or not, whether you went to trade school or not, whether you grew up in the city, rural, whatever, right? These are all different things that affect people in different ways. Whether you grew up with someone with mental health issues in your household, whether you've lost a family member, have you dealt with your own mental struggles and worked through it, through therapy, something that certainly is going to affect more first responders than not if they get into the job, when they get into the job. Like, what does diversity mean and how are you engaging with it? Are you recruiting actively in traditional methods? Again, just doing the things you've always done because that's the way we've done them? Or are you thinking outside the box and trying to get in with different groups, communities, different formats and frameworks? You got to ask yourself these questions, brainstorm. And it's not just about the recruiting team. It's about the whole department, right? The whole organization. Are you partnering with the community, schools, community colleges, teams, other organizations? All right, number 13, get clear and realistic about timelines. What equates success, right? Is it just filling your ranks? Or is it getting a certain number of potential viable prospects? Because where you're starting from is greatly going to influence where you can expect to go. And this is a personal belief of mine that routines are a lot more important than goals, right? You can write a goal on a wall and say, hey, we're going to be full staff by X. That is great. It sets direction. You have the compass. But it doesn't mean anything unless you break it down to what your quarterly, what your monthly, what your weekly tangible action items are that are likely to get you to that place, right? And have times where you circle back. I mean, this is just project management 101, how you can break down this stuff into timelines, but think expansively, think creatively about how you would measure that, and maybe make it more than just like the recruitment team, right? Maybe you make it a whole department thing. What is the command staff doing to impact recruiting other than installing a recruiter? Like what are the tangible things that each link of the chain and each branch are going to do to affect this thing that we all need, which is really good, viable people to do this job. All right, number 14, use an interview rubric or scorecard. I mean, that's pretty standard as far as government, so I'm just going to move past that. We have to standardize things from civil service perspective, and that's good. What it does make me think about though is, and that's good, it's a government job, government agency, so there are certain systems. So I will breeze past that and recognize that's probably a lot more applicable to the private sector where you don't have leeway, or where you have, it's probably applicable to the private sector where you have potentially too much leeway. All right, number 15, don't discount previous candidates. I love this one because there's a lot of candidates who have circled back to me and my team because they just need more time, and we gave them actionable steps and we asked them to come back, right? It's kind of like your favorite reality show, talent show, like The Voice or what have you, where, hey man, like you're not quite ready. I can see you got the right things. Please come back, right? Audition again, next season or the one after, because people can change and grow, right? We know that as individuals. Everyone listening to this knows that there was a time when you got hired and you were ready versus the time you tried and you weren't. And for some people that might be weeks apart, for some people that was years apart. And a lot of us can recognize when we got hired, if we didn't, how much better we would have been in 2 years or 5 years. Like, I'd put my hand up with that. Like, I've been pretty frank about saying, I got hired at 21. I was not quite ready, but I was all right as a candidate. And I'm glad I didn't make more mistakes. Like, I'm glad I didn't have more emotional immaturity that I was dealing with. Certainly pretty mature, pretty squared away, pretty responsible for a 21-year-old male. But there's a but after that, right? I've also heard from a lot of candidates, maybe it wasn't even ones that returned to me, but people that returned because of prior recruiters they dealt with, right? Saying, hey, I talked to the last recruiter who's awesome, and now I'm old enough to test. I've also heard from candidates, a lot of people who circled back and said, hey, I've reached out to this and this agency, it didn't work out, and one, they're hard to get a hold of, and two, there was no feedback, and I just never even got the sense that they cared, and they're on to the next one. Whereas you have provided feedback, you took the time, you seem to care, not just about me as a candidate, but I imagine you care about a lot of your candidates if you're treating me this way and talking to me this way. But I also get the sense that you care about your officers as a sergeant. I also get the sense that you guys are about engaging, right? You guys are about doing the best job you can, which is a team that I want to be a part of, right? Actions speak louder. So what are you demonstrating? And how you're demonstrating, again, your regard towards a candidate is how you are setting the tone for how they can and should expect to be treated in the agency. And you're setting the tone for how you expect them to treat others in your agency and how you expect them to treat others outside when they're doing the job, right? You all know that as far as leadership goes, I think that we should take care of our people so they can take care of other people. Like, that's within the building, that's outside the building. That's a super low-hanging fruit, tangible, simple idea that can be expounded upon, that can be extrapolated out in all these different directions and angles and strategies. But at the end of the day, this job is people taking care of people, right? There's cool guns and fast cars and all this stuff. There's case law. There's stress. There's excitement. There's adrenaline. There's investigations. There's tech, right? But at the end of the day, it's people taking care of people in times of need. So to summarize, we went through 15 points from bonusly.com. It could be from any website, right? I could have done this episode or a version of it with any other top 5, 8, 10, 20 bullet points and talked about what that means for police agencies. And my sincere hope is that it helps everybody recognize that there's no secret sauce. It's taking the time, giving it a good go, leaning into the grind, right? Engaging the whole team, thinking outside the box, and keep driving forward, right? I am more than happy to talk to folks about this. If you have people at your agency that need some more hands-on coaching through this process, hit me up, send me a DM, send me an email, bluegritwellness@gmail.com. This is what I'm here for. And a lot of the questions oftentimes manifest into a perfect post, right? Whether it's a reel or a post or a little blurb I can write about, which again is just trying to share out this message that's not that complicated, right? If your agency has the big bucks and you're hiring every ad agency, cool. Like that's not gonna hurt. It's not likely not gonna hurt. It's gonna cost a lot of money, and it might not get you any results, which is what I see happen oftentimes, because they don't have the 1-2 punch of officers engaged at the ground that are grinding and having the conversations and giving the time, right? It's all those things. And for sure, the latter part, the officers making direct connections and relationships and bringing people in, that's way more important, right? I'd like to think that the tech, the tools, the software, the companies, the radio ads, whatever, can help that along, right? Maybe it can grow your message to scale, but it doesn't get anybody hired. Your people having the engagements, having the phone calls, doing the tours, that's who gets people hired, right? So let's not put it out of order. Again, you know how to get a hold of me. As always, share your feedback, share me your messages, your questions, what you'd like to hear more of, because I'm here to help. I'm happy to do it. Without further ado, thanks for listening. Share it out to your people, share it out to your representatives and your agencies that you think it would help, your other OSAs, like your neighboring agencies. Every share of this message helps the podcast grow. So I really do truly appreciate it. I'm humbled to be a part of your growth journey or your agency's growth journey, and just being able to be here, having these extremely critical conversations for and alongside law enforcement. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.